Class is now in session. Join the Podcast Mogul Phil Better as he gives you tips, techniques, and strategies to grow and monetize your podcast. Live in his Facebook group, The Better Method of Daily Audience Growth for Independent Podcasters. Learn from him and his special guests as they help you become the next podcast superstar. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, podcasters of all ages, put your hands together for your host, Phil Better. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Invest in Yourself, the podcast series. I am, of course, your host with the most, Phil Better. Sorry, I'm just setting up stuff here. I'm going live also in Clubhouse as well. I'm trying something different. We're going to see how this works. So ladies and gentlemen over in Clubhouse, hey, how you guys doing? Guys, live in my Facebook group, of course, it is the Better Method of Daily Automation, Daily Audience Growth for Independent Podcasters. Hello, Skipperoo. We're going to just mute you guys. Everyone should be muted in here. Give me a second here. Oh, there we go. Everybody, this is just a test right now. Thank you, Will, for the intro. If you guys are listening over on Clubhouse, you guys should jump into my podcast group. Like I mentioned, Aaron, what is up, brother? It's always good to see you. Aaron is the host of Horror with Sir Sturdy. Then we got the El Jefe himself, El Chifo, the big guy. Will Wiz over. Loving the new intro. Thank you very much. I just put it together. It just finished today and uploaded it. So today's session, everybody, is the power of being a podcast guest. Why is it so important for you to be a podcast guest? I will let you know. This is it, guys. There are unbelievable power in being a podcast guest because you can create relationships that go beyond your wildest dreams, and I'll get into that just a little bit. Of course, we got the man himself, Jeff Rivilla, on asking everybody to be a guest. Yes, make sure Jeff has a great podcast that is specifically garnered towards the news of podcasters. So definitely go ahead and hit him up. I just Outshine and Uprise, I believe it is. Jeff will put the name of the show in the show notes down below. But yes, you make connections like Jeff, who is doing something amazing, a center of news for podcasters ago. It is fabulous to be creating those connections with podcasters around the world. So when you become a guest on a show, you create a great Rise and Outshine is the name of the show. So if you're watching on YouTube, Rise and Outshine, make sure you go check it out. He does it live. It's a great show. But again, you make those connections, you create a network of people that you can work together to grow your show. When that's just one benefit and power of being a podcast guest. You create this network of podcasters that you guys can connect with, and you guys can have help. Whenever you're stuck, you can reach out to them. I get DMs all the time. I send DMs to most of my podcast network friends about stuff that I just come up with. I'm like, hey, I was thinking about your podcast. I know I've done it to Sir Sturdy himself a few times. I think he gets annoyed with me. Will, I think I've done it for Will as well. Your podcast, but yeah, I send him a message. I'm like, hey, this is what I think you should do on your podcast. Like, here's a way to monetize your podcast, or here's a way to grow your podcast. I will send you random messages. And that's what you do when you create that network. Like, if you have an idea that can help someone, you send them a message, be from a guest to a podcast host. That's amazing. Like, so if your expertise is on SEO and you're a guest on a podcast, you're like, hey, I was just taking a look at your website. I would suggest making 1, 2, 3 changes. Boom, you give that to the guest. From a guest to a host, the host is going to be the host will love it, and they'll be like, thank you so much, you're going to grow the podcast. That means your episode is going to get out more. They're probably going to promote your episode more, and then you get more people coming into your business if it's a business, or listening to your podcast. Remember, when you join another podcast in your niche, you know their listeners are already close to your ideal listener. So what does that mean? That means they could potentially become your listener and eventually fall down your listening funnel, become a raving fan, and then before you know it, they're promoting you to hundreds of their friends, and you're growing and growing and growing. You never know who's listening to your podcast as well. So when you go on to another podcast, and one of your listeners to hear you on another podcast that they listen to, they're going to become even more fans of you, because like, oh my god, this guy's networking, or this person's networking. I apologize for putting some gender in there. It's 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 the way that you supercharge your room, your podcast, your business, everything. When you connect with other people as a guest, that's also a way to drive traffic to whatever you need. Because you have to remember, they will be promoting your episode to their network. So that means other people will hear you, and there's a potential chance that they'll share that episode with other people if you're bringing value. What you have to do when you're a guest is bring value to the episode. Have something specific you want to share. So whenever I go on a show, I always direct people to my Facebook group, because it is, I'm not, okay, there. It's okay, Phil. I wasn't offended. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Wiz. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I'm not sure what you're talking about. But anyways, I'll get back to you on that. And I'm sorry if it was putting things on. I'm a little, when I'm monologuing, I don't see the chat, and I apologize for that. But yes, and Wiz has a great show, amazing show. You should check his out. But when you are a guest, you have to bring value. So when I go onto podcasts, I always send people, my call to action is to join my group if you want to start a podcast or you want to grow a podcast. Why? Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Completely. It was a throwaway comment. Anyways, thank you, Will. Yeah, I send people to my group because anybody who wants to start a podcast, they need to know about growing their podcast, because that's so important. Growing your podcast is so important because not a lot of podcasters know how to do it. And it's the number one thing I get asked. How do I grow my podcast? How do I get more listeners? Do I get more downloads? So going on other podcasts, that will help you, but you have to direct them to listen to something. Don't have 1,000 call to actions. Your call to action is always one when you guest on a podcast. And you're always talking about one topic specifically, and you try and weave everything around that topic there. So like, I'm an expert on podcast growth and monetization. So when I go on, I look for podcasts that talk about podcasting, because that's better for me, to be honest, because there's more audience for me. But also, if I go on other people's podcasts, like if I'm going on Sir Sturdy, luckily for me, I do have a movie podcast, so I can promote that. I can talk from that point of view. But then I can also afterwards, because my business is helping podcasters, so I can talk before and after. I can tell them, hey, I was thinking about this for your podcast, a way to monetize your podcast. And then you can actually have something actionable, and then later on come back to me and ask for my help for coaching in that. That is the one. But if you're a movie podcast, like Sir Sturdy is a movie podcast, and you should listen to his Horror with Sir Sturdy, and Pints and Movies, I believe, is Pints and Popcorns is his second podcast you have to check out. But let's say he goes on to another horror podcast, and he's like, hey, I want to talk about the fact that I do my live streaming of the movie that I'm going to review on Mondays. I believe that's what he does. Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for showing up. It's a pleasure you're here. like if he's going to be guesting on another horror show, he's going to be there and goes, yeah, I do. He can provide that advice. He says, like, I've seen a big increase in downloads or listeners or followers by doing this strategy. You share that strategy with that other podcaster, you're going to raise him up because that person. I apologize, my guy. I do. I check it up to me being Canadian. I apologize a lot, and I mess up names because the way our tongues are. We lick too many cold icicles. There, boy. Anyways, but yeah, he can share that advice with another podcaster. I shared it with him, but he shares it with another podcaster. That's going to raise that other podcaster up, and then that podcaster may suggest something to Aaron. They're sturdy about how to grow something else or how to make their show a little better, how to make it more efficient or secret behind their sauce. And then, you both grow and you have this connection. You help each other grow and grow. Before you know it, you guys are up to 1 million downloads, making $1 million because each of you guys are working together. That is the power of being a podcast guest. You can raise up, you can learn something from another podcaster, or you can offer solutions and you can grow. Because if you help them grow, your episode gets out to more people. That means more people will listen to your podcast or come to visit your business or pay you for your service that you're selling. That is the big power, is when you help another podcast grow, or if you help a podcaster with your expertise grow or monetize their show, they will then be able to promote the show better, which will mean more listeners to your episode because you provide value in the episode. You always want to be providing value when you go on another show. You want to be giving as much knowledge away as possible. So if you're an expert in movies, and you go on a movie podcast, make sure you know everything about the movie you're going into, and you can provide some behind the scenes stuff, something that you can add to it. It doesn't have to be huge, monumental, something secret that maybe someone else doesn't know, a secret in your group, like you've learned about this movie because of it. You interviewed a host or a guy who I was on a podcast, actually. Here's the good thing. I was on a podcast talking about the film Serenity. And at the time, I was actually with one of the on the podcast with one of the head visual effects experts of the movie. Okay, and he was talking about a little Easter egg, and on that Easter egg, talking about the opening scene of the movie Serenity, where you're coming out, or the opening scene where you're Inara's ship and she's about to take off. In there is actually the Millennium Falcon as well as the Starship Enterprise in it. If you look closely and the ship's taking off in the background, there's a Starship Enterprise. Now, I went on another show and talked about Firefly and brought that along too. I added value, so it made people enjoy the show more because it gave something that they didn't know about, because maybe no one heard about that on this other podcast because no one was listening to it because it's a completely different podcast around a different subject. So then you have this other podcast talking about one movie. I'm bringing over value from I heard on another podcast. So you're creating value, even if there wasn't about selling my service, growing a podcast or anything about that. I'm bringing value to the listeners because they may not have known it. When you're a guest on a podcast, you want to bring value to the show, not just be another name without anything to provide. Obviously, your opinion on a movie, if you're doing a movie, your opinion on a sports team is valuable, but providing more value than you're receiving from the host is the big thing, because you're going to end up having your show grow from the results, because you being on that show, other listeners are going to hear you. You provide value. They will want to know more about you and listen to your show more. So they'll come listen to your show. And as long as you're providing value on your show, they'll be enjoying who you are and they will love you and become raving fans of you. And you're raising another show. So, in summary, when you're a podcast guest, you have access to the other person's audience, the host's audience that they cultivate. When you provide value, you make those listeners trust you. When they trust you, they come listen to you. And where do you send them? You send them to one place. Your call to action on anytime you guest is to one place. I send them to my Facebook group. You can send them to your podcast, your website, your social media, not 1,000 social media. You go, hey, if you want to find me on Twitter, because that's your main account, you say, find me on Twitter at here. If it's Instagram, whatever. Focus on one social media as well. But your call to action is sending people to one place all the time so that it's easier for people to find you. Remember, people maybe not watching live, maybe not listening, and able to find all the things. They could be running errands, they could be driving, they could be doing 1,000 things. So you want to help them remember one thing, repeat it 3 times, but send them to one place. And then give a piece of advice to the other host so that they can grow their show a little more. Whatever is helping you grow, provide that to them if it's a little secret sauce. But that's pretty much the show. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Invest in Yourself, the podcast series going live from the Better Method of Daily Audience Growth for Independent Podcasters. My name is Phil Better, the Podcast Mogul. You guys are amazing. And I want to thank everybody who's joining me live today. We had a great session. All the comments are amazing. I love your faces. And remember always to invest in yourself.